thank you everyone for joining. Our last event tonight is our last event as part of the project Becoming After Ruin that we developed. Suprainfinit Gallery has developed in partnership with Odesa Fine Arts Museum and the Museum of Recent Art in Bucharest. This project lasted throughout the entire autumn. And it actually started with a solo exhibition by Daria Koltsova in our gallery in Bucharest. And it also unfolded another exhibition in a vitrine and a series of events. I would just very briefly mention, for those who are not very familiar with Becoming After Ruin, it's a project that approached ruins, rebirth, and conservation from a very multidisciplinary perspective. And I would also like to mention that it's been implemented by Suprainfinit with support of Izoliația Foundation, Trans Europe Halles and Mali Berlin, and co-financed by the Zmina Rebuilding Program. We are super happy to have Yuliia with us tonight. And thank you very much, Yuliia, for joining us tonight in this talk and conversation about Daria Koltsova's practice and also thinking and rethinking modern art in Ukraine. I would say, yeah, without further ado, Yuliia, you have the floor. And for everyone attending, there will also be the opportunity to ask questions. Great.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for having me. Well, I will probably start already with some visual materials that I prepared for you today, just in case. I hope you see it well. Is it like full screen?
It's good, yeah.
Yeah, great. So the topic of today's conversation is Daria Koltsova practice, and I would love to start probably with a short intro how we start working with her and what was our first project and how I am being and more art historian pimped into this cooperation, I think. So we worked with Daria, I think, much earlier than the first project we launched. Because Daria was also cooperated with Odesa Fine Arts Museum during my art historian / curator career there. But we didn't have a chance to work together properly, and it was always like this, coffee drink conversations about how it would be great to make this exhibition one day, but it never, come to an end. And we were talking about the way how Daria looked through the topic via her personal stories and can woven her personal stories into some spaces. I found it very interesting in her practice how she found a place and can make a very site-specific story, not only site-specific object, but site-specific story for the space she's surrounded. And we were thinking about that probably some boring things in art historian part can be refreshed by contemporary art. And that was our first thoughts. And then in 2022, after full-scale invasion of Russia, and I got a invitation to work in Museum Ludwig in Cologne, one of the biggest museum, I think, with contemporary and modern art collection in Germany. And I had a Ernst von Siemens Stiftung stipendium there, so I had a contract for 1 year. And those time also were a very big traveling exhibition planning by Konstantina Kincha and Katerina Denisova and Olena Koshuba-Volvich, one of the researchers from National Art Museum in Kyiv. And they were planning to make a huge launch, a traveling exhibition of modern artwork from 20th century. And the main idea was to make a very beautiful, historical, very historically tailored exhibition about a complicated topic for Europe. In one hand, because most of this artwork during the whole history before were presented as a Russian avant-garde. And in the first time in the history, probably, those artwork were recognized by the whole society of art historians in the world as a part of Ukrainian heritage. And it had two big goals. I think this exhibition, first, to show this artwork abroad and to show them in peace, to show them in a safe space, because those time this artwork were in danger in Kyiv. But on the other hand, to make this contradictory dialogues with big collections of these artists who all the time were recognized incorrectly. They were recognized as Russian artists. And I was sort of responsible for the second venue of this exhibition in Museum Ludwig, because they have one of the biggest collection of so-called Russian avant-garde. So I had kind of a goal to be a curator, but the whole historical part of exhibition were mostly curated by the group of curators. So when we sit together with my boss those time, Rita Kerstin, we would talked about that it's very hard to explain to today's audience why this topic is so special, why this topic is so important. And it's very hard to draw this line from 20th of 20th century to 20th of today. And it's very hard to explain why all of these historical traumas is really used to repeat themselves. So we were thinking that one of the best way how to show it and how to explain it to audience is to engage contemporary artists who, based on this heritage, in the visual language, in some sort of methods and career, but in another hand, live through the new trauma, through the new historical trauma, and how this can explain a bit the very complicated narrative around a Soviet narrative, around a post-Soviet narrative, around war experience, and other historical traumas that were before. So that's probably the point where we start working with Daria, and I wrote to her, I explained her the whole concept, and we started thinking about what it should be. But it's important to mention that it was our first project together, and it probably was the first such huge art objects Daria made. So it was a big risk, I can say, but I'm very happy that we take this risk, and I'm very happy that we really push among the boundaries in this artwork, in any understanding of this word, because it was 300 kilogram stained glass installation that scared all people in museum to death, especially those who montage it. And if you see this walking human being is, half of the size of this installation, but it also lighted from the back. And all of these things should be sorted together. And I'm really happy that we made it. So we had a very interesting goal. And I can say that during this exhibition and during working with Daria together, I think I learned what it's truly mean to create something new. What does that mean to have this creative thinking? And because when you work with such problematic historical context, and you work with contemporary artists, you should find this connection, but in another hand, you cannot dictate the narrative to the artist, because this is not what you are looking for in the result of this art. So when we start working on this exhibition, we try to tell about everything at the same time. And the first narrative that come to the mind were Daria's personal story. And of course, this is what I truly love in working with Daria, that she always woven her personal story in this historical context and make it, I think, personal for the audience too. So the first thing that you see on this huge installation is Der Sprung. It's the huge constructivist building that was erased in 1928 in Kharkiv. And Kharkiv is a native city for Daria. And during our long hours conversations, she told me that for her, it's like this Fuji mountain view, because you were in the shadow of this huge building, but in one hand you kind of impressed by this building, but in another hand you start to deconstruct this construction in the way of historical meaning of it. And we should understand that this building is the masterpiece of constructivism architecture. But on the other hand, it's a symbol of all Soviet totalitarian regime that came to Ukrainian land. And so it's a beauty, but it's also a very dark symbol. So that's why this symbol is kind of overshadowed by the sun that's rising upon this constructivism building. But we also had, in another hand, Ukrainian modernism artwork that were surrounded by this piece of art. And when we start looking at pictures, but I also start researching local archives, and we found out this beautiful artwork of Alexandra Exter, that one of the most famous, I think, Ukrainian artist, but previously she was represented as a Russian artist. And we found this scene sketches for theater. And this repetition of circles, I remember, became one of the central symbol for Daria work that took the whole construction. And it's a very beautiful idea, because even though the constructivism building should keep the whole form of the stained glass built around the circle. And this colorful circle also, of course, reminds us about Sonia Delaunay and the whole this spectrum of artwork in 20th century. And Sonia Delaunay was from Odessa. So it's all, come together and tessellated, as Daria called this work, in one picture. So literally tessellated, because she put all things together. And another story that came to the table, I think, of our conversations, were how to, first of all, we also had some sort of interesting contradiction narrative inside this exhibition, because there was kind of a line between what is Ukrainian art, what is Ukrainian avant-garde art, and what is Soviet art. But in 20s, this line was not that defined as we now see it. So, for example, Vasily Yermilov, one of artists from Kharkiv, who created a special album for press exhibition that happens in 1928, the same year where Der Sprung was erased in Kharkiv, that happens in Cologne, show album of Ukrainian culture in Cologne. And we decided that it's a very interesting story, because now we can not only connect today's Kharkiv with today's Cologne, but like Kharkiv in 1928 and Cologne in 1928, but this connection. And 100 years ago, Yermilov, being a Soviet artist, being a Soviet designer, he implemented pieces of ethno-culture in his designs. So, for example, to show Ukraine as part of Soviet system, he made around 10 albums that he designed with elements of embroidery, but also with elements of carpets. He implemented their sort of other elements of ethnoculture, and at the same time, Daria also started thinking that she have very personal connection with this collecting of ethno objects. She also have her personal collection of these accessories, traditional accessories that Ukrainian women tailor themselves, but also a story about her grandmother that preserve ethno objects in their house where everybody talked Russian, but some kind of preserve these elements of Ukrainian identity and culture. So she started moving it into the whole picture, and it started moving into this constructivist building. So what you see on this picture, that this beautiful but very heavy constructivist building of Держпром, it overshadowed, it's somehow even totally covered by this beautiful symbol that is combination of different symbols. So in one hand, it's a wheat, and it's kind of a wheat accessory, but it's also a face of a person in the middle, but also a sun that symbolize unpersonalized hero that are not present here, but we don't know even the gender of this hero. Probably it's a female hero. It's a female face that come from the past, but still exist, still preserve in some small elements and symbols. And on this picture, you can see how it looked in the exhibition. So in any way you go inside the exhibition, you always face the reflection of Daria's work. It was reflected in other works, but other works were also reflected in Daria. So it was a permanent dialogue with the history behind. And it was also like a permanent dialogue with some symbols. For example, I love this, and I also like put some photos from that I made myself, that these pictures of Kazimir Malevich were placed in front of Daria's work. And for example, this face with the crosses that also connect us to old Ukrainian tradition of motonka, like tailored hand dolls that were prepared from different materials, but it was a very important symbol of cross that were placed on the face. Also reflected on Kazimir Malevich early artworks, where he also sort of repeat this Ukrainian traditional way of depicting face with a cross. And we see that Daria works were reflected on this artwork that were also changed during the whole exhibition to new Kazimir Malevich artwork all 2 months. And in one hand, it's sort of idea to show that Malevich also had this roots to with Ukrainian visual tradition, but in another hand, it's also opened a lot of conversation why we show Kazimir Malevich in Ukrainian exhibition, because there was a lot of discussion those time that he is not Ukrainian artist, that he's a part of Russian avant-garde. And we open conversation about Russian avant-garde and how we can deconstruct this term today with Daria work too, because Daria work helped to show that this tradition of visual language is continued today in Ukrainian art too. And another thing that also very important is a material, is the medium Daria chooses, it's a stained glass. It's sort of unusual. I can say it's sort of unusual material for contemporary art on West. I can say because it was not something common, and most of the curators who come to exhibition were a bit surprised by this material because it's felt like old-fashioned idea for especially Cologne, because they always find this connection with religious tradition. They have very old religious tradition of stained glass work. And by very interesting coincidence, Museum Ludwig, just in front of a huge church, dome, Cologne Dome, one of the biggest Gothic church in Europe, with the huge stained glasses from medieval time, reconstructed from the medieval time, but also with a huge stained glass artwork of Gerhard Richter, who made it especially for this Cologne Dome. So everybody with the Western optic who came to this exhibition, they saw this connection with Köln Dome. They saw this connection with religious thing, and they always see this cross as an idea of Christianity and maybe like the constructing of this Christianity. But everybody from the post-Soviet, from the Eastern side who came to this exhibition, everybody was like, oh, it's a Soviet. It's a Soviet monumental art. So it was interesting that even the medium confused in the way how we talk the story. And that's why in our catalog, we a bit explained it in the interview with Daria that her references were not only with the religious part, but mostly as a dialogue with stained glass tradition, with monumentalistic art tradition that came from the Soviet time, but also like a dialogue with huge artists from 60s, especially non-conformist artists from 60s, who built this tradition despite being under pressure of Soviet power. And we also put the story of Alla Gorska and her destroyed stained glass of Shevchenko that was totally destroyed by the main power because the Soviet power found it too contradicting to the main idea of how Soviet hero could look like. And it's also one of the narratives of Daria works, this absence of hero or the abstract hero that come to the place but cannot be depicted or cannot be totally defined because in these historical circumstances, this face were totally destroyed. So we don't see the face of the hero, but we kind of feel the presence of it. And I just wanted to drop one artwork of Daria's, and not, like we can say that colleague in some sort of way, because Danila Halkin is one of Ukrainian contemporary artists. And just to show that idea of this dialogue or overcoming Soviet history is one of the very important topic for Ukrainian artists today, I can say. So Danila, he also worked with the idea of Soviet monumentalistic art, but he don't use the same medium, but he kind of reproduce it in another medium. So it's canvases, and it's totally the colored artwork that also show kind of hidden story behind this. Another exhibition that we made with Daria was at the same year as Here and Now, and also in Cologne, because I was still in Cologne and I was very deeply connected with Ukrainian community there. And Blau-Gelbes Kreuz is big volunteer foundation, but they also start making sort of cultural projects because they understood that it's one of the way how to engage people to help Ukraine and to feel this connection. So I don't know how, but they convinced a huge museum, Columbia Museum, to give them a museum for 1 day and 1 night to totally fill it with artwork, but then to take it away. So we had one museum for only 1 day and 1 night. And that happens because they change the exhibition spaces. So they kind of clean all museum before making new exhibitions. So we have a window to make this project together. So and those days we worked in a very limited time space, unfortunately, but it was a very interesting space because this museum built upon destroyed church during the Second World War. So there is ruins of church on the basement that you can see, but also a very beautiful new building. And this story also opened for us a conversation how we can build something new on the ruins. I think it's also deeply connected with what the project of you, Cristina, and in general, like to build something upon ruins. So I asked Daria to give us this artwork, the poem of the Blackfield, and we created a big exhibition space. We connected 3 artists, and it was a conversation about lost landscape, because the second room was with a theater about Holodomor, and we opened a conversation about how land and landscape can commemorate our historical traumas and how it commemorate today, how land can be wounded, how land can be destroyed, how fields can be totally burned down. And this Daria artwork, of course, talk about current situation with Ukraine and how Russian soldiers and Russian missile attack destroyed land, destroyed wheat, destroyed agriculture. But on the other hand, it was also kind of a connection with the Holodomor of 30s and the huge famine that was produced by Soviet power because it was created by people. It was not a natural famine. It was a famine that was made on purpose. We also put an artwork of Leah Dostleva, and if someone visit Ukrainian pavilion this year, she also were present there with her husband artwork. But this is her solo artwork. In your region, even mountains are fake. And she talked here about a very specific story of Donbas region where mountains made because of mining work. And these mountains are not really real because it's a result of mining works and exploitation of land by Soviet power. And another artwork here, and unfortunately this photo do not depict this installation. It's Olga Chikotovskaya. She based in Düsseldorf, and she's a Ukrainian artist. And she showed videos that her friend, who is currently a soldier in Ukrainian military forces, from different fields. So it's how fields looks like today. So it's like a direct connection with documentary materials, because she also showed some photos of sunflowers, and sunflowers become kind of a symbol of Ukraine, but also for European people. For the first months of full-scale invasion, I can say sunflowers was also a symbol of their own crisis, because all sunflower oil totally were absent on the supermarkets, and they were scared that they won't have this material anymore. And I remember that they kind of connect this crisis process to what happens in Ukraine. So it's also kind of a combination of different narratives depicted here. And the last but not least exhibition project, we were in Krakow. It ended not so far away time. And this exhibition were about, so I probably should say that I'm more identify myself as art historian rather than curator, but I'm kind of also curate my art historian researchers and convert them to exhibitions, I can say. So it was an exhibition about Odesa art, and it was, the name of this exhibition is Long 20th Century. So idea of this exhibition lay on a very simple fact that according to historians, the Second World War were the last war who ended all wars and ended all empires. And there was an idea of the Second World War that a war that ended and destroyed all empires. But unfortunately, we know that not all empires were destroyed, and the Soviet Union were then reintegrated or reincarnated into Russian Federation that have still the imperialistic imperialistic approach, let's say this way, imperialistic state of mind, state of state. And there was a conversation about that some sort of narratives that started in 20th century didn't still end in 21st century. So that's why it's a long 20th century, because we try to show via artworks and via art history the true history of Odessa as a city with a very complicated story behind, with a story of being very in one hand, mythological city, but in another hand, imperialistic city or idea of being imperialistic city, but in another hand, very multicultural, very open, very, very diverse, multilinguistic, and etc., etc. So it started from artwork of beginning of 20th century and end of artwork of today. And of course, the last part were dedicated to artwork that reflected on 2022 and the full-scale invasion. So that's why I asked Daria to give us this beautiful artwork, and I put it back to poetry if I only knew how, because it had a very complicated story behind, and it's deeply connected with Odessa. And I don't know if Daria in this conversation now, but she told me this story, and it also was a very funny situation in making this exhibition, because like few years ago, before this, one of Odessa Museum didn't want to acquire Daria work because she's not Odessa artist, and they acquire only Odessa artists. And we kind of joked about that we should put Daria into Odessa context because it's so unfair. And we found a way how to put Daria in this Odessa context, because what is depicted here is day, evening, night, and morning of war behind the windows. And it's depicted in very abstract and beautiful manner. So you not always recognize the trauma behind these beautiful colors. And this is one of the most powerful part of this artwork, because it's so poetic. But you cannot put it out. You cannot put out poetic of colors and this material, and you cannot put out poetic of the situation in general. And of course, in another hand, this artwork is also the continuation or a reflection of the project Daria started in 2014, Theory of Protection, when she created a installation with taped glasses, but also after 2022, it continues as an idea of visually support Ukraine and to be solidar with Ukraine. So a lot of institutions, they taped their windows in solidarity with Ukraine, because that's how Ukrainian people and museums and institutions tape their window to preserve themselves from explosions and etc. So in one hand, it's of course Odessa windows, because Daria faced the full-scale invasion in Odessa. But in another hand, it also was put it in a sort of Ukrainian Odessa context, and it was together with artwork of Dmytro Zulfan, very post-ironic artist who created this installation that say no future, future now, that kind of opened the conversation for audience in the end of this exhibition? Do we have a future, or is future now? And you can see it. We had this complicated windows, that show you war, that show you destruction, that show you all suffering, but in another hand, so beautiful that you cannot put poetic from this. And this windows is literally those windows that was destroyed in Odesa National Fine Art Museum when in 6 November 2023, right before this exhibition, missile attack hit near Odessa Museum. So we are happy that this was not inside museums, so museum didn't wasn't hurt that much, and now everything is fine, and there's ongoing making exhibitions. So, but it's kind of a connection with the institution that gave this artwork to the exhibition abroad, but was hurted at the same time. And when we create this artwork and talk about Dershprom and Kharkiv, Dershprom were still okay, but we was all the time thinking that depicting something that you love so much is the way how to preserve it. It's the way how to preserve it for yourself. And we was talking about that Dershprom is so important for Daria as a building. And we was just like, oh, that's, you're kind of anxious all the time to read the news, to hear that some sort of buildings are destroyed, because they're so important and special for you, or symbolic for you. And we was talking that Dershprom survived during so many historical horrible actions, like Soviet time, like Second World War, but wasn't destroyed. And we just really hope that everything's going to be okay. But unfortunately, like 1 month ago, it was hit by a missile attack. It's still reconstructible, but it's kind of an idea that today Ukrainian art, Ukrainian contemporary art, it's have multiple dialogues with different contexts, but not only with a history, but also with, it's like not only with the past, but also with today. Because it's not only a dialogue, this artwork today is not only a dialogue with Dershprom from 2028, but it's also now a dialogue with Dershprom from 2024. And we cannot take this out from this artwork anymore. And that's probably most of the thing I would love to tell about, our common work and the practices, because what is more important to mention that Daria created artworks that can find multiple connections with the space. And that's what I told in the very beginning, that it's sort of unique idea, unique skill, I can say, to find this connection, like an octopus, to find a connection and settle them together with absolutely different surroundings and different times. That sometimes it's very complicated to talk about, because, you see how many pictures I have to bring to explain it, small pieces of artwork. But when you look at this, you don't need this explanation probably. So that's one of the more beautiful part of this cooperation. And probably that's all I would love to mention, at least in the presentation part. Cristina, you mute yourself.
Oh, I'm on mute. Yes, sorry. Thank you so much. And now, apologies. I realized I wanted to briefly tell about you, that you are actually, yes, an art historian and curator specialized in Ukrainian modernisms, but you mentioned everything in your talk. I will very, very briefly talk about the exhibition that I curated with Susanna at Suprainfinit Gallery in Bucharest. Actually, we met Daria when the invasion in Ukraine started, when she came to Bucharest. So that was 2 years ago when we met her. And the very first project we did was theory of protection, because our gallery is on the ground floor with large vitrines. She showed us, she said, I'm an artist. And we were like, wow, despite the madness and, horrible invasion that was starting, we started also talking about art. So right away we said, okay, we need to do this solidarity action and do theory of protection. Very fast forward, 2 years later, this autumn, we managed to, gather the funds and all these ideas together and do the first big solo exhibition of Daria in our gallery, titled "In the Splendor of Fallen Suns." And I have to say, and also listening to you, Yuliia, I think this idea of landscape has been central to the exhibition, to this show in Bucharest. And reflecting on ideas of a lost landscape, of a wounded landscape, of a torn apart nature and landscape in Ukraine, but actually creating a sense of hope and also contemplation for all these Ukrainian landscapes that Daria refers to. And I would go one more picture down, if possible. And no worries.
I think it's all. I think you can share your
I think it's
presentation.
all.
I will just,
I think, yeah.
I will just.
Oh, Maria,
I will just...
sorry. Maria will put the. So basically, in the exhibition, Daria really reflected on the fragility of landscapes and objects. And again, she addressed this relationship that I feel she keeps going back to, the relationship between memory, historical memory, I would say, personal memory, and build environments. And I think it's interesting how Yuliia, you mentioned, she works with the space, and she managed to do that within this exhibition too, by working again with stained glass, but by also working with other sculptures and also experimenting, I would say, with new techniques for stained glass, and creating this immersive installation that right away kind of plunged you into both a beautiful and obsolete landscape. So, after we installed the entire exhibition and we were in the space, to me, it really looked like and kind of sounded like a ballad for nature, a ballad that she wrote for nature. So she created this very large scale, very monumental columns, monumental column, wheat grains that kind of look like columns, and sunflowers, burnt sunflowers. And she called them witnesses. And I also like how she played with the title of the work. Somehow, nature becomes a wounded witness. Nature is a witness of destruction. And at the same time, the way she looked at nature in the exhibition and how she monumentalized it, kind of nature reclaimed its own creation and rebirth in the gallery space. So there were 5, you can see now this sunflowers, also referring to the burnt fields of sunflowers and wheat. But she deliberately, for this species, for instance, she deliberately decided to use stained glass, that black stained glass that the light cannot go through. So I think it was also a very unique and interesting way how she played with reflection and non-reflection, or how she, and actually the reflection of the viewers and how they could mirror each other in the artworks, and somehow mirroring to her traumas, or to the trauma of nature that has been happening to nature in the past 2 years in Ukraine, but not only in that specific region, I would say. So, and I think another layer to these sunflowers, it's also her very, and going back also to this idea of abstractness. And I also like how minimalistically she works, and how the profoundness she gives to the works. And these flowers have very spiky petals. So it's something beautiful, but also very aggressive into it, and it's monumental. It's facing the human body. It's facing the viewer. It kind of captures the viewer in that aggressiveness, and in the end, very traumatic experience, I would say. And going back also to the wheat columns that were very large scale, almost 3 meter high, wheat grains, and for these ones, she actually decided to work with concrete and stained glass. So again, alluding to this constructivist material that is concrete, but actually connecting it to the fragility of nature and how easily nature can be destroyed. Are there more photos? I think it's good to. That's also.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's only me, or everybody also didn't see the presentation? I just to ask.
I can see it.
You can see it. I can also see it.
Okay, probably it's
somebody else. I see.
Okay.
We have a comment. Maybe Maria, if you could put the third image, I think it's very interesting to have an overview, and then after this one, yeah, the overview, the whole installation, yes. And of course, during the day, it was also interesting in the gallery how by the day the light came through the gallery, and it's reflected through the central piece, the colorful stained glass that then, of course, made all these exactly reflections around. And this is also this artwork took the name took the title of the exhibition, In the Splendor of Fallen Suns, and it's actually it's very interesting with this, because somehow it seduces the viewer. You can step inside, so it kind of seduces you, and kind of traveling into a constructivist architectural past. And this also goes back to her hometown, Kharkiv, But what's interesting with it is that she actually stumbled upon this image of an old Soviet propaganda stained glass that, it was exactly like what you see now on the left. And it was an image that she really liked, but she was, of course, very conflicted to work with. And I remember this phone call with her in the night saying, "Look, I think I know how to work with this image and how to translate it into the work." And she said, "I erased the character. I completely erased that Sovietic figure." And I was like, "Oh." I could imagine it in my mind, but it was also great how she explained it that night, and saying, "Look, I kind of tried to depoliticize it and to you know now it's also a common, like, art and politics, they are, hand in hand, and they affect each other, and they, cross-pollinate each other. But however, she wanted to look at the image, and essentially in the background of the image, she saw again nature. She saw a big sun, um, and she could see quite a neutral landscape. So that's how she decided to work with it and erase the character, and therefore kind of give back that landscape its own agency, without this very charged historical past. And of course, then she said, "Look, I want to make it a portal. I want to make it round." And this also brings me back, Yuliia, to what you said, this repetition of circles that are found in Daria's practice. And I think it's so interesting. And with Sonia Delony, and now I can see how all these pieces come together. And it is that, and also in this exhibition, it is a lot about circles, from this intense sun to dark circles, almost like a dark hole that is the dark matter of the universe, or the dark interior that at the end everybody has, a dark side of humans. So yes, that's, I would say. And then a last work also are the postcard. Oh, okay, the birds. I wanted a bit to go back to the postcards, and these are called postcards from home. The again, representing in a different format and shape, Ukrainian landscapes. The right one, it's again a field of sunflowers, and the left one is more, I would say, the seaside. But she also likes this small dimension. She wanted to have something that, a memory that you put in your pocket. It's also a bit, these postcards somehow relate to her memories of kind of a lost or a wounded landscape that she remembers, and that she hopes that one day it's going to come back to life. And the last picture, going back to that, um, these are birds. And since the very beginning, when I remember we talked, which was, I don't know, a few months before the exhibition, and she said, "Look, I want to have birds in the exhibition, but, kind of dead birds." And I tried to picture it. I couldn't really picture it. She showed a photo. I was like, "Wow, no, I mean, we don't want to buy a taxidermy bird, to." So we actually me and Susanna, we didn't see this work until the very end when the, shipping came with all the works. An important note to add, she produced all these artworks in Ukraine during 2-3 months of super intense work there. We shipped everything together and we started unpacking, and then we see the birds. And I was, almost crying somehow because I felt, wow, they are so minimalist and kind of abstract, but so strong in the shape, in the color, in everything, and again, a bit, harsh. There are some headless birds with no wings. Um, and it's a group of three. We really wanted to put them together in this back space. Anyway, it shows, the all the artists and the people whose voices have been taken away in the last years. And all the suffering and no choices of people, of artists, and so on. Okay, good. I think it's time for questions or comments or yeah. If somebody wants to know more or we're happy to answer any ideas or questions.
I would have a question
Yeah.
to Yuliia, and thank you very much for the presentation. I was very curious. You mentioned kind of deconstructing the Russian avant-garde and kind of revisiting this, how it is framed. And I was curious whether you could talk a little bit about that, because I'm very interested in how that relates to maybe decolonizing certain practices within art history, and then thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I really appreciated you asked this, because I didn't pay attention a lot on my presentation about that, because it was not always enough room for this. This exhibition actually started from this, from opening this conversation, what is literally is Russian avant-garde, and why we still use this term, despite the fact that everybody knows that this term were created not by the artist of avant-garde time, but by the Western critics, but also mostly by the Western art market, because this term were actually used by collectors and dealers and gallerists and auction houses, such as Sotheby's, Christie, and blah blah, to sell more attractive picture. And it was umbrella term that was used to call every artwork from so-called East Bloc or under Iron Curtain and etc. And Cologne have a very interesting story about that, because part of the, first of all, what is important to say that Museum Ludwig called after Ludwig family. So it's a Peter and Iren Ludwig who collected artwork around the globe. There was a huge milliardaires, billionaires who have their own chocolate fabrics, also very colonial product, by the way. And so they build the millions on this, and the collected artworks, as you know, Ludwig's museum is not only one, so it's existed around the globe. It's also in Aachen. It was also one in Russia. It was also one in Cologne, because they've especially built a whole the whole building for this. So, and he gave one of the part of this collection that he collect this so-called Russian avant-garde, and he buy it via Mrzynska Gallery, who had connections with some Soviet guys, but also with the Soviet attorneys who were presented in the West Germany during the Soviet time. And it's also a story about fakes. It's also a story about not real artwork that was made as Russian avant-garde, but it's also a story about ignorance of this colonial optic, let's say this way, because we talk that this decolonial perspective, and especially in the Western, in general, in the Western academic world, it were somehow focused on themselves. So they try to decolonize their own history, their own historical background, their own heritage, try to reconnect with the ex-colonies to make this restitution program, and etc. But in this way, they kind of overlooked another empire that also have imperialistic narratives inside their own collections. So they didn't see that there is some difference between Ukrainian art and the Russian art or Belarus art. They, I don't know if you know, but for example, still in the German language, the Belarus that sort of, so if we literally will translate it to English, so Belarus is mean white Russia, white Rus, and they translate it in the German language as a white Rusland. So they translate the name of country, and it still exists in the language. So it's also about the language, how to deconstruct the language. And the first thing I did in Museum Ludwig was to retranslate or make the Latinization of Ukrainian names and cities and etc. into German language, but directly from Ukrainian language. So not using this Kyiv stuff that was in the language. And it took really a lot of time to explain what is important, because people just used to see this way they used to see. And they just like, okay, we understand that the Russian avant-garde is just a term that was created in 60s, 70s by us, but still it's a very comfortable term. And still there is no another alternatives for this term. And in this way, we started conversation that there's just a modernism movement from Ukraine with Ukrainian roots, and that it's very historically problematic to put some national identity into this time, because the idea of national identity were only on the very beginning of historically the national identity was only like developing in the end of 19th century and 20th century. So yeah, it was very, very complicated question, I can say, but we started working with archives, and I worked with archives, and I can say that, for example, I found one fake artworks in their collection of Museum Ludwig that was not the real artist, but they think that it was the real artist. So it's just it's a question of yeah, I explain for especially my colleagues from Germany the problematic of the situation in a very simple metaphor, I could say. There was one psychological experiment. I don't remember when, but so experiment is about attention. There is a video where you see that guys just drop one ball to another. And they drop from one side to another. And the guy from the video told you that you have to count how many times they drop ball from one side to another. And you totally focus on counting how many times they drop it from one side to another. And then in the end, he asked you, did you mention the guy in the huge costume of gorilla who just jumped on the backside? And he just like, no, because he was so focused on counting how many times they drop this ball, so you don't see the huge picture. And this is the way how sometimes we look at art history. We so focus on usual narrative, so we don't see the big gorilla in the middle of the picture. And the big gorilla is a Russian imperialistic narrative in the term of Russian avant-garde. So, and that was, I think, very clear after that for them, because it was like, okay, yeah, it seems like we overlooked something. And I found out that it was very comfortable term to overlook something. So yeah, we're now talking that some academic can overlook some narratives because of, sort of historical context. But I found out that this decolonization methods or optic, it's not, it's not like you can use it for every context. It's every time changing inside the context. So you cannot say that it's a universal tool to deal with every colonial discourses or post-colonial discourses at all. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your answer and for your last comment. That is very, very inspiring.
Thank you a lot for this question. Maybe there is another one.
Is
I
that
have a question. Hello.
Hi.
About these artworks, I saw a lot of context about collective memory and personal memory as well. And this question is pretty interesting for me. Like, I'm trying to feel how these works have been perceived in the global context for the moment. Like, I mean, for us, it's a collective memory. It works well. We can see these patterns, symbols, and could this work just become a part of bigger discourse? Because I'm working a lot as well with this kind of symbols, and it's interesting for me to understand if it's comprehensive, if it's perceived, by the public who has other memories and traumas.
Sina, maybe you can answer. What's your audience, how they perceive it? Because I told previously story that, this monumentalistic idea was confused with religious thing because of the background of German audience, but maybe it's a bit another situation with Bucharest. And because I think we have some sort of common background also. Maybe there is another perception of it.
I think with this exhibition in particular, I will unfold a bit, and with theory of protection, I think we got a lot of good feedback, a bit also people being intrigued, and some of them even said, wow, that was the best use of the vitrine. It was a bit shocking. It was taping the windows. It was a strong gesture, and it was there and it was visible, and people were curious, but I think it was a bit a bit shocking. That's why they also, in a way, it stayed with them for a longer time. And for this current exhibition, I would say overall people really liked it. We did some tours. We also had different events around it. I remember we had this symposium in the gallery, and we talked. We had some architects also invited. We talked from an architectural perspective, what's what modernism meant, how it maybe failed, how everything that was related to constructivist architecture, and how, and brutalism, and somehow clear. I mean, it was always a feeling of empathizing, but from a very personal experience, I would say. So everyone, I felt that there is a collective memory and there can be a collective trauma, but they were always, even in this talk, I remember people were talking very personally. They were also very personal. We did a reading. We started with a reading group, and we all read from one book, and then slowly people started commenting, and it was clear that, you know, one was an architect, the other one was a psychotherapist, the other one was an artist, the other one was a journal or like a writer. So everyone brought a very personal experience of or understanding of trauma. You know, I think for the time being that day, and I think for the events we created within this exhibition, we managed to create a bit of a collective feeling. But I think it was from quite a very personal understanding. Yes. Yeah. Maria, I don't know if you want to add something or
Yeah, on the reading, yeah, I think it was I think, yeah, just having the connection between the text that we were reading, which
yeah.
about it was Oksana Timofeeva's How to Love a Homeland, and to connect this idea of home with this notion of fragility, which is kind of like where kind of what our conversation gravitated around. And I think it was great to have architects in the room because I think yeah, it just created these connections between architecture as sort of a like collective endeavor, and we kind of yeah, it was like a really free-flowing discussion, and in that way maybe I think it quite like activated this aspect of collectivity. I'm not very sure whether collective memory, because I think also in terms of the kind of like post-socialism, I think also there's this intergenerational gap. And I think, but that's interesting because people being of different generations, they have different experiences of what socialism or post-socialism is to them. So yeah.
Yeah, I can probably add a bit on this. On this intergenerational thing, that probably what I found it very interesting. It's quite surprising, but not surprising at the same time. In Germany, for example, that a generation like my generation or younger than me, they are they founding this period of time of the ideas of socialism quite romantic. So they romanticize it because they have zero connection with the reality of this times or with the reality of these ideas. So I found out that for them it was more like romantic story about the timing, and maybe like you know, even with the felt of nostalgia or something like that. So they didn't see the way how it, so they didn't see the trauma in this. They see, you know, sort of picture that, you know, that a bit attractive in the light of leftist ideas and stuff like this. So I can say that, for example, in this context and in a conversation or in a dialogue with more a young generation of West audience, especially those who goes to this exhibition, it's very important to highlight or to make this differentiation in the symbols, and to show this the construction nature of you know, of the method. And because it's a big you can just jump into this romanticization context that it's absolutely not this work about. But I think Daria do this perfectly, and especially with this erasing hero, with erasing. So she kind of left all socialist from socialists. I don't know how, but she did it. And that's kind of interesting because it's not like nostalgia about these beautiful times, but it's like, this pure analytic eye that you put on this topic, and you kind of I don't know, really deconstruct it on pieces. So but I can say that
the attention, that's what I like. She shifted the attention from that main character, male character, strong body, to nature that many times is fragile, and it's actually going through creation and destruction, generationally, let's say. That happens with seasons and everything. So that's what I also. And actually, going back to audience, that we had audience from architects, they loved the piece. They loved that work, and they were interested. They were really like, they were coming and looking, and they were like, they could feel, this so socialist constructivist past of the image itself, but something was missing. So that was great. It was somehow levitating on top of a past that is, and this levitation was both critical but also artistic.
Just still interesting for me.
I hope.
I still have questions. Sorry. I'm now in France, and here the story is similar to the story what you told, Yuliia, right now about German public, because they are still continuing to draw everywhere like a symbol of Soviet Union and think that it's super cool and smart, and it's like a next level of the life. They think like that because they never actually touched it. So my question is still like, just it's too abstract. I know, it's just like your opinion I'm asking. If it's possible by our collective memory, because we have it and we are using it, like artists using it in the art, is it possible to change this global context?
You mean the global context of perception of the Soviet idea? Oh, it's a very complicated question. I'm not sure, to be honest.
It's very complicated, yeah. Did you see our election? No, I don't want to talk about it, but our elections are disaster. Yeah, but we will not leave this Zoom meeting if we start talking about it,
Yes. I totally agree that it's kind of, it's so problematic because in one hand we cannot come to another country and say that please now think this way, because it's not the way how the democracy works, and this is not the way how the free of speech and etc. works, and it's also not the way how the art works, because then art became in the propaganda in this way, but the propaganda of good ideas, as we think. But I think that what is important in this way to be in art, I don't know how to say it, because it's not like being very careful in what you're talking about via your art, but it's like being very careful in creating the context of how you show it, and maybe how you bring the whole narrative around it. And you still can work with the Soviet symbols, and you still can work with this, like, I show you the Danilo Galkin work, but I do not see there any romanticizing. But maybe it's me with my context, and maybe like your French audience will see the huge romantic story in this beautiful canvases. But I think it's also like about creating extra narrative around it. It's not only about curator text that nobody reads, but it's more about like what dialogues you bring around, maybe what people you bring around, like the story that Cristina and Maria shared when everybody, read the same book and, were on the same page, literally, maybe kind of these things, like to bring people on one page together. And maybe this is the way how to create, because you cannot dictate it via art, but you can manipulate the narrative. This is what curators do. I mean, we are sort of manipulating the narrative, and this is the way how, for example, because how I bring, very obvious why we talk about this. In the next room of the Daria work, there was a video with museum workers with destroyed museums, and they have an interviews and they talk about how they suffer, how the culture suffer, and it was like, the step after our Daria work. So it's very obvious that it's not about how we love the situation and how we love the Soviet time. It's about how this trauma repeat themselves, how the situation repeat themselves, and now we see that artworks in danger. So this is the way how you, I think, can tessellate this narrative. Thank you, Daria, for this work.
And also with the show in Ludwig, I think the show in Ludwig of Here and Now, it's a clear sign of this, of disrupting, you work with such a, strong collection, and then you tell them actually some of these artists here that are labeled Russian, they're not Russian, they're actually, so you really and you kind of already shuffled things around and questioned and made people, even the museum workers in the institution, wonder and rethink, even rethinking even their understanding of history of art. So I think that's how it starts, and then if more and more structures, like these big institutional structures, but also like us, that we are like, a small gallery, and we do different events, we collaborate, we did a projection in the cinema, and so creating different sub narratives that together are coming to create this more collective narrative that will show a different face of the coin, but it's actually not only the other face, because it's not only two facets, it's like multiple facets, so it's showing different tentacles. I liked how you said, Yuliia, with this octopus understanding of history, but without not only one head, so each tentacle has its own brain, right? So it shouldn't be all under one umbrella. So
I think that's a very nice thought to end with.
Yes. I agree.
We can stay in touch, Lera. I mean, nice to meet you, and we can stay in touch.
Nice to meet you too.
Just as
sure.
Thank you for answering it. Really, it's like kind of sometimes obvious questions, but when you're like in your especially artistic bubble, sometimes it's not so obvious, because like everybody are speaking about the same, and you don't see like from the distance how it works with it. So thank you.
And thank you everyone who stayed.
Thank you everyone who stayed. Yes.
Was that late night, and I wish you everyone a great evening ahead and a weekend soon. So
yes, thank you, and again thank you, Yuliia, and also thank you, Daria, and everyone involved to make all these events and the project happen. Good. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye bye.